Hey, this is Anthony Pacheco from Griffon Games, and this is an intro to my intro, because in the intro I talk about three parts to this video, and there are only really two parts. The third part went on a walkabout. I don't know where it went. I need to go find it, so here we go. Hey, this is Anthony Pacheco from Griffon Games, coming to you from our underground bunker in Sammamish, Washington. This video is in three parts. The first part is about the fallen barony of Wailmoor with a video tour. The second part is a project update, and the third part is going to talk about our video schedule. I'll link each part in the low bar so you can just skip to the sections that you want to see. And so here we go. Now, before we get started, I have to mention that yes, I use the Corel products and not Adobe. So I'm not an artistically inclined person, and I've been using Corel products since version 1, and I just can't help myself. And so yes, I do upgrade it every now and then, and so please don't give me a bad time about this being Corel paint. It actually works pretty well for what I want to do, and it will load pretty large files, and so that's kind of really all I need right now. It's not great for making video recordings, but we can work with it. So this is a video tour, and this video tour is just going to go through from the west to the east, and we're just going to talk a little bit about what's actually going to be in the module, and that will give you some context of where we're headed and what your PCs will be running into. And so let's just talk about this file. And this is Anna's file, and it doesn't look great because it's actually, if you notice up here, it's at 16% zoom. It looks a little wonky, and that's because it's highly compressed more for the resolution that I'm recording this at. And guys, this is an amazing file. You know, I think this is one of her best maps that she's ever done, and I'm not saying that because I paid for it, or actually you guys paid for it. I'm saying it because from a technical standpoint, it's just amazing, and the more I work with it, the more enamored of it I actually become. And so let's just start where the PCs are going to start. And so here we go. So the first thing I want to say is now we're at 50%. If I actually took this map and blew it up to 100%, which I believe is, there we go, you can see this map has an absurd amount of detail. So if you're a VTTer, the DM and player version of this map is just going to be amazing. This is just a type of map that you just won't see quite often. You can see everything from, you can't really see the individual trees, but you can see individual clumps of trees, and then you actually see how the landscape is formed. And so if your PCs are running and they run in a certain direction, you can just look at the map and say, well, you ran into a ravine and the ravine dumps you at this location. That's the entire reason why we gave this map. Our campaign adventure path is really gritty, and that grit needs detail. And so this is why we got the map. The PCs actually start at the end of the crossroads, and I'm not going to talk about this too much because when we do the next video, when we're actually talking about the NPCs that inhabit the world, I'll actually show that map. And there's actually a map for the end of the crossroads by cartographer Tad Davis. We actually commissioned that before the Kickstarter even started, and he did an outstanding job, and so we'll just go over that map later. The end of the crossroads is where the PCs start, and there will actually be another video more towards the plot rather than locations. Suffice it to say that the PCs will have a lot of motivation to go into the Wailmoor and start exploring it. And the end of the crossroads is where they start that. These roads, the road heading off to the east and the road going north and the road going south, these are imperial roads, and they're actually paved. And assuming that you actually want to use the campaign world that we're going to be putting in a separate book and shipping to you at a later time, hopefully not too later. And so these imperial roads, when they meet at a crossroads, they have infrastructure to support the people on the roads, and that's just the only thing there. There's a couple of farms to sell foodstuffs to the inn. There's a stable. And there's just a manor home, and that's it. It's actually kind of a small place, but if it gets bigger, that really kind of depends on the actions of the PCs in the Wailmoor. Their actions of what they do towards the east of the inn of the crossroads impacts the size of the inn. And so if I zoom this back out, the road that goes east from the inn at the crossroads, that is the road to get to the Wailmoor. And it actually goes all the way through the Wailmoor up to Castle Wailmoor, splits off and goes to a village that is just a ruin. And that is kind of the anchor for the entire Wailmoor map. It's kind of an obvious route to travel, but it's in disrepair. And you'll notice, if we scroll back in here, that there is actually elevation to this. It's just an easy climb, and eventually, as they climb the plateau, because if you take a look at the map, this is actually a plateau that sits above the inn at the crossroads. Going back on our tour, about 3.5 to 4 miles, mainly pretty much 4, the PCs will run into an obelisk, and that obelisk is an encounter that they will need to overcome, or the obelisk will just keep drawing bad critters created by a different obelisk and sending them down to the end of the crossroads. And so this is the very first thing that the PCs, if they stick to the trail, they'll actually encounter, and they'll have to overcome the obelisk. Otherwise, the people at the end of the crossroads are just screwed. From the obelisk, you have the old graveyard, and this graveyard is interesting. It's a highly magical place, but while it has encounters on it, they're not defeat the monster encounters. They're more of memory encounters or informational encounters. Basically, this is a warded graveyard, and we'll actually talk about the wards throughout the Wailmoor because there are several of them. And this is a place the PCs can actually go, even though it's a graveyard. It's more like an overgrown garden that has a bunch of graves in it. And this graveyard is actually the safest place on the map. Nothing can actually bother the PCs that go into the graveyard, and the PCs, as reincarnated Knights of the Wailmoor, actually can get into the graveyard while everything else is warded and prevented from coming into the graveyard. It's kind of a lore-heavy place for the DM to actually start adding things into the module as they see fit, or just ignoring it, or giving it some type of personal flavor or character. The way the PCs find out about the graveyard is that they have a lost memory about it when they encounter this obelisk. And so they'll know that not only is somebody actually buried in the graveyard that was in this vision, they'll know that person actually had magical items. And so if they're interested in digging up that person's grave, they can go to the graveyard and do so. Now, some PCs actually might think that doing that is actually going to be sacrilegious, but it's not. Essentially, what they're doing is they're digging up their own grave, and the PCs are reincarnations of the Knights of Wailmoor, And the Knights of the Wailmoor are actually the only people allowed in the graveyard, and so those are things that they could take, and they'll actually probably need some of those things. Otherwise, this adventure is going to be tough. But they could choose to leave it alone. So continuing down our road, we get to the Old Bridge. And the Old Bridge is where they have another lost memory, introduces Silas. The memory points them towards Silas Tower, which is a tower that the PCs can encounter additional clues about not only who they were, but more of who Silas is and why Silas was doing what he was doing and what these obelisks actually were. And so we'll talk about Silas a little bit later. So before we head east, let's talk about some detail on the map that's optional. You have the cairns with tombs, and these tombs are basically where the old barons of Wailmoor are buried. There's quite a few of them. They don't really contain anything of importance as far as treasure that the PCs can use unless the DM actually puts them there. And the Hardred Hills contain a copper mine, and that copper mine is guarded by a black pudding. And so if the PCs actually take care of the black pudding, which will be a pretty good feat because this is a low-level module, black pudding, not exactly a low-level monster, they can actually use this mine as a source of income. That's all on the option of the DM. But these border locations are there specifically if the DM wants to add more detail. Now, the Hardred Hills comes into play in the second module, and we won't talk about that much here, but there's a barony to the south of the Wailmoor, and that barony is quite wealthy and influential. Sorry, not a barony, a duchy. And the Duke of Hardred, that these hills share the same name, is a very influential person in the Kingdom of Lothmar. And in the second module, the PCs, they can become friends with this person, keep them at arm's length and more of a neutral disposition, or he can be an enemy, and not really an enemy you want to have, but it's certainly going to be an option in the second module. And so that's the Hardred Hills. The Old Bridge, west of the Old Bridge remember there's one of those obelisks, and south is Silas Tower, but southeast is basically a bog. And so this entire region south of this bridge is a swamp, and it's a pretty monster infected place. And what's causing all these swamp critters to turn into monsters is another one of these runaway obelisks. And this is another obelisk that the PCs need to destroy in order to get into Castle Wailmoor. There's 3 obelisks on the map. The PCs have to destroy all 3 of them to be able to unlock the secrets of the castle, get inside, and see what's actually in there so they can start making sense of not only their lost memories, although they'll probably get more questions and answers on that, but make sense of what the Demon War is all about. And there's also loot in there, and everybody likes their loot. So lots of monsters. This might not look like a big area, but zoom in 200%. Even though the swampy areas basically go from the Old Bridge and then just a little bit past the bend in the river where it meets up with another tributary. 20 feet of swamp is actually significant, but here we have several miles of it, with a mile or 2 wide, and it's not only difficult terrain, but if the PCs don't move through here with care, the critters that are in here will eat them, and they will eat them a lot. And so the actual module, we give you the stat blocks for all these creatures. Most of them are customized creatures that might be recognizable from other low-level adventures. There's crocodiles that have been possessed, so they're demonic crocodiles. Tainted wolves. There's floating mists that will suck your blood, and of course there's swamp dogs, which we'll talk about in another video. Any natural creature that in unto itself is kind of a chore for low-level PCs to deal with have been corrupted by this obelisk. And so this obelisk will just spit out monsters on a weekly basis until it's destroyed. And the PCs are going to have to deal with that. And so let's zoom in on the tour. So this tour, Belver Tour, you can climb it, and it actually triggers a lost memory of when the PCs in their previous lives were Knights of the Wailmoor. So it's important in that aspect. There's actually nothing that says the PCs need to climb this, but it's kind of an obvious spot to climb. You can see it from the old bridge. You can see that it looms over the landscape, and then it's just a natural vantage point. And so the PCs are rewarded with that lost memory when they climb it. And at nighttime, you can see all the things that glow, and there are a bunch of things that glow at night, and this is one of the ways that if the PCs are ignoring the lost memories or can't make sense of the lost memories, climbing this vantage point is one of the ways they can get more tactical information about the barony around them. Now let's go southeast before we go northeast. The reservoir. This is a really interesting place because you can actually see on the map that it has a dam. This dam is really was originally created for flood control by one of the rich barons of the Wailmoor. But his son was a wizard, and essentially over the course of a couple of decades turned the dam into an artifact of great power. This is the mechanism that powers all the wards that are in the Wailmoor. Now this is hard magic here, hard fantasy. We actually don't put barriers up and say, hey, this barrier is permanent because Joe Blow Wizard cast a permanency spell on it. There's an in-game mechanism for powering wards, at least in the Wailmoor, and that power actually comes from this dam. The three obelisks and the graveyard and the tower in Castle Wailmoor, and Castle Wailmoor itself to a large extent are actually linked to this dam. Briefly, we'll talk about the plot in a later video. This is more of a tour of the landscape, but briefly, Silas knew about this linkage between the graveyard and the reservoir, and with the help of one of the few remaining Knights of the Wailmoor after the Demon War, tried to do the same thing. He tried to link the obelisk to the dam, and he was successful. But what Silas and his Knight of the Wailmoor war wizard friend didn't know is that most of that linkage was using divine magic between the graveyard and the reservoir. And so since they were using arcane magic, it didn't have the oomph to resist demon corruption. So over the course of the years and decades, 150 years in fact, these obelisks became corrupted because there were demons in the Wailmoor that have not been either exorcised, they're actually possessing people, or they've not been killed. And demons in the world presented in the Curse of the Lost Memories are corruption, not just physical violence or kind of the two-dimensional D&D look of a demon. These demons are very corruptive. And if they're not dealt with, they just corrupt everything around them. And that's what's been going on for 150 years. And that's essentially the overarching plot. But the reason why I mention that is because this dam is the subject of Beneath the Dreary Wave, which is actually the next module in the series. So the PCs, when they destroy the obelisk, stop the obelisk from using the dam to power their corruptive influences, which is a good thing. But Silas's spells that he injected into the Wailmoor is causing a runaway effect that the PCs will just have to deal with. Not only will they have to deal with it to preserve the Wailmoor that they just cleaned out of monsters in the entire first module, but they are actually linked to the Wailmoor. Their last incarnation before they became the PCs are actually buried here, and this dam is magic is run amok, and they'll have to deal with it, and they'll have to deal with it in such a way that they preserve their freedom and ability to make choices rather than being, just reacting to the things that are going on around them. A really important place. The PCs actually can't do anything here. It's an artifact and it's warded. They can't do anything with the dam, although they might try. It's pretty darn interesting. And they're actually told during several Lost Memories that the wards of the obelisk are linked to the dam, and so that they'll probably go looking for it. Now, there actually is a DM device here. There's a druid that flies around the Wailmoor, and it's Boo the Owl. And Boo the Owl actually sits in the bog looking at the obelisk, wondering what he's going to do with it when the PCs stumble into the bog. And it's a DM device. The PCs might be able to see Boo, but they could. And Boo actually can talk. He's not an owl, a druid that turns into an owl. He's actually an owl that's a druid. And he has a backstory with that. And the DM, that might not be your thing, so you can totally skip him. But he is actually a device that might talk to some of the things that he's seen, but after he encounters the PCs in the bog, it tries to figure out the dam because he's never seen anything quite like that. And so the PCs can actually go to the reservoir. They might get frustrated they can't do anything with this dam. Hey, but at least if the DM chooses to have that option, there'll be a talking owl there that they can converse with. And the owl actually might say, hey, I can't do anything with this dam either. Maybe you guys go somewhere else. So, Dacaris Farms, so this large area is essentially very rich farmland. And there's, although we're at the edge of the map, you can see it kind of has a natural basin type look to it. And this is where all the food in the barony was grown. Lord Dacaris and had several knights, and he was a rural lord, and his knights were certainly rural. They were all agricultural based, and they all were responsible for the foodstuffs that came out of Dacaris Farms. Now there were other farms, but they were primarily sheep and some cattle. Mostly sheep, in all the other places in the barony. But this is where vegetables came from. During the Demon War, these people got waffle stomped. So while you can tell that there were farms there, they've all been burnt to the ground in a slash and burn campaign. And the reason why they were burnt to the ground and the farms destroyed was because the demons were possessing a large number of people in the Wailmoor. Well, possessed people have to eat. They're essentially immortal. They don't age or die of natural causes like a disease. I think they actually might be immune to poison. I can't remember. But essentially, they need fuel just like non-possessed people. And so during this demon war, back to the east, there were some elves, and these elves were receiving refugees, and one of them was possessed. And so these elves didn't really know what was going on. They just knew that something really bad was happening in the Wailmoor, and they kind of figured out that they should probably go scout out, and so they sent some scouts into the Wailmoor. The scouts came back and say, hey, everything's just gone completely to shit. We really have to deal with this. We're not really too sure what we can do. We're just a few elves, and there's a lot of demons. And so they incorporated guerrilla warfare in their response. And one of the things that they did, which was actually pretty smart, was to burn all these farms to the ground. And that's what they did. And then they left, because that's pretty much all they could do. So if the PCs want to invest in the barony after the module, they don't have to. But if they do, this area is where all their foodstuffs are going to come from. And any druid or anybody with an agricultural background will recognize, like, hey, this place really has a lot of good soil to grow a lot of good food. And so let's leave the farmlands and head north. So from the Belver tour, both at night and the daytime, you can see the old battlefield. And this is where most of the traditional battles of armies occurred, where the martial might of the barony met the martial might of the demons and their allies. And it's actually a horrific place. Nothing grows there. The ground is broken and churned up. It weeps muck. It smells like blood and magic. It's just a nasty place, and so it's difficult to traverse, and it's kind of a sad, depressing area. And the PCs actually have a lost memory that guides them to this throne. The seat of Barbu is where the demon Barbu, who was actually leading the demonic invasion of the Wailmoor, that was his seat of power. And so he would sit there and direct his troops. And this is where the PCs will actually encounter possessed people for the first time, because there are two possessed warriors who are essentially guarding the seat because they don't really have anything else to do, and they have a different perspective of the march of time. And so these demons possessing these two warriors, although it's been 150 years since the battle, they just don't think that way. And so while they may be bored, they spend their time hunting game, and anything that comes into the battlefield is fair game for them. And they essentially guard the seat of Barbu, because the seat of Barbu is what curses the land around it. And so the PCs, if they're trying to just clean the Wailmoor out of all demonic taint, have to deal with that. Otherwise, it's just going to be a demonically influenced area in their backyard. Shrine to the Maiden. The Maiden in the lore in the world presented is, in the Chronicles of the Celestial Chains adventure path, is the goddess of war. And it makes sense that there's a shrine outside of the corrupted battlefield for the Maiden, because goddess of war, and it was a war. So there are a lot of actually benefits to arriving at the shrine. It can empower the PC's weapons to be more effective against the demons. And if the demon people actually worship the Maiden and come to the shrine, they actually get some additional benefits. And there's actually some other ways that the PCs can actually interact with the Maiden herself at the shrine. The goddess of war in the lore is a pretty chaotic person. So she's chaotic good in an alignment sense, but she's more chaotic than she is more good. And so every shrine is to the Maiden, and every temple is different. And so even if PCs actually worship the Maiden, which is highly probable, because if they have a barbarian background, a non-civilized area background, most of the warriors from those societies worship the Maiden. And even they won't know exactly what to do or what the effects of the shrine is, and so that's just something they could spend time trying to debug. So one of the last things on the map to the east is the giant Totor. This, I believe there's a simple encounter here, but this is another vantage point. It's a vantage point from the other direction. And you can see if the PCs actually climb that, then they will be able to see vast tracts of wilderness to the east. This is the Wailmoor was the edge of the empire and still is to most extent. There are things to the east. There's elves. There's people who do not want to be associated with the empire, but that's kind of a vantage point. Climbing these tours and looking beyond the landscape is one way that the PCs can actually kind of see that, hey, there's another 12-mile hex that we can add to our party. North of that is a bunch of wilderness. This is actually also farmland. It wasn't farmed during the Wailmoor. It was left more as a wilderness area, as a kind of the edge of the empire. But it's certainly possible. So heading northwest from Giant's Toe Tour, we come to some meaty places of the module. You have the Big Lake. It's a mile wide and several miles long, and it used to have an Elvish name, but it's kind of cheesy. The human cartographer that was mapping the area just crossed out the name because it was too long, too difficult to deal with, and just wrote the lake. And that's what it's been, the Wailmoor has been stuck with. You have Griffon, which is just a ruin. There's not very many buildings standing there. I think there might be 3 out of the entire town that served Castle Wailmoor. It's the duchy somewhere, maybe the water mill. Not the duchy. There is a old smithy. There's a water mill that's surprisingly well preserved. There's a fountain. And there's just not much here other than the things that want to kill the PCs. And this is Griffon is another place where the PCs can encounter demons. These particular demons, are actually not possessing anybody. They'll attempt to follow the PCs and able to get into Castle Wailmoor. And the likely scenario is the PCs will go to Castle Wailmoor, can't get into it, just like their lost memory says that they won't be able to until they've destroyed the obelisks, and then leave to go destroy the other remaining obelisks. And so the demons will, at that point, they're done. They're just way too frustrated that they've been trying to get into this castle for 150 years. They think that the PCs are going to be able to do that because the PCs look like they know what they're doing. And if the PCs just go there and turn around, these demons just lose it. And that's when the battle starts. But Griffon is not really interesting. The DM can make it more interesting. We didn't really spend a lot of time with the ruins because this is in lore, the Wailmoor, this demon war dragged on. And so these aren't places that had one battle. These are places that had dozens of battles. And towards the end of the war, the people that were left used the elf tactics that I talked about previously of slash and burn. They killed anybody they didn't know. They killed anybody that acted funny. They burnt things to the ground. They basically, although they were still engaged in a traditional war, a lot of the people of Wailmoor reverted to guerrilla tactics. And so Griffon is interesting for kind of the watermill and the old smithy that's still there, but really is just a sad, abandoned, burnt down, wasted place that is just a stepping stone on the way to Castle Wailmoor. So the castle itself is mostly in the ethereal plane, and it can't come out of the ethereal until those 3 obelisks are destroyed. And so the PCs can go up to it. They can try to enter it, but it's pretty obvious that there's something really wrong with it because you can see through it. It's translucent. It's not completely opaque. You can actually see the green glow of the wards that have dragged it from reality and kind of stuffed it into the ethereal plane. And there are a lot of answers in the Castle Wailmoor, and to get to them, they have to destroy the 3 obelisks, and which leads us to the Temple of Dvalin. So this temple has what I call the last obelisk, but it's not really the last obelisk. You can do these in any order, although if you do the Temple of Dvalin first, which is possible, they could actually just skip everything and just walk there. They'll die, and the PCs will, if you have PCs who are more inclined to be murder hobos and just kill everything that they want. Again, this is a sandbox. Their first level, these are not only challenges for 3rd and 4th level PCs, but they're difficult challenges. So it's kind of like the difference between tailored and status quo. This is a status quo area. It has traps and guardians and critters and requirements of attaining knowledge in order to navigate it. And so if the PCs get to the Temple of Dvalin, there are several things in there that encourage them to leave, but if they don't, they're going to die. And those are the breaks. Now there's a death mechanic that's separate from D&D 5e and Pathfinder that is linked to the lost memories, but it's in some ways it's easier to come back from the dead for the PCs, and in other ways, this is hard fantasy, it's worse. And anyway, that was a tangent, but I wanted to explain kind of the sandbox nature, that it is possible. And one of the ways that you can get to the Temple of Dvalin is that you can see it if you're doing aerial scouts. So if one of the PCs has a familiar that flies, or they themselves, like say a druid that actually can shape change, I can't remember exactly what level you can do that in. But if they turn into a bird, or they have a bird pet or familiar, you can see it from the air, and there's something there that glows at night also, and they can march their way onto it. It's pretty doubtful, but it's possible. It's a sandbox. If it happens to you, roll with the punches. There are many clues and hints that you just need to go in and find the other obelisks. And so that's just something that you'll just need to deal with as a DM, and hopefully we've given you the tools to do that. So before we go back to Castle Wailmoor, let's just talk about the other stuff on the map. You have the ruins of Heronville, the Statue of the Lady. I mean, we just talked about the Temple of Dvalin. So the Statue of the Lady is actually a statue of the person who is actually in Castle Wailmoor presently. At least what she looked like before she aged centuries without dying. And this is a place of rest and contemplation. It's located in the Lady's Woods. And the Lady's Woods is named after the statue, and it's pretty inhospitable. I mean, the PCs can wander around in there, but all they're going to do is encounter difficult terrain, unless they're a ranger, and critters. Most of them who will run away, some of them who will want to eat the PCs. The town that was next to the woods is also, just like Griffon below it, was a town where the rich people of Wailmoor lived, and so there were a bunch of estates, there were a bunch of manor homes, and it's all been burnt down. And essentially there's like 2 buildings and a fountain in this town, or a large village, the ruins thereof. And these are where the bandits have taken up residence. And the bandits basically serve the witch that is sitting in front of the Temple of Dvalin, wondering just how she can get inside of it. And the witch herself doesn't know the PCs by name, but she knows that there's somebody now running in the Wailmoor, and just like the demons in the village of Griffon, she also wants to get into the castle, but doesn't really know how. And so if she encounters PCs, she might try to talk to them, but she's not really a charming type of witch. She's more of a blow you up type of witch. And so she's essentially the end of chapter 2 and with chapter 3 being the Temple of Dvalin. But she has some bandits with her, but the leader of the bandits and his gang have taken up residence in the ruin of Heronvale. Can be completely skipped. There's anything in there for the PC to get other than information on the witch, which they actually might have already encountered. But if they haven't, and they go to these ruins, then they can obtain some lore and intel about this nasty person sitting in front of the Temple of Dvalin waiting to kill them, essentially. That leads us to Castle Wailmoor. So once all 3 obelisks are destroyed, the castle fades back into the prime material plane, if you want to use that terminology. But basically it fades back into reality and is then accessible. It contains one of the things that they'll notice, the first thing it does is it fades in, it actually has a needle-like a tower attached to it that is elven architecture. And that's where that's where she lives, and that's where she's always lived, and that's where she's actually kind of cursed to live, and that's kind of the impetus of the entire module. Is throughout the module the PCs will hear these hints of who is this person, and we'll talk about that during the plot video. But the PCs eventually learn that, well, the Knights of the Wailmoor kind of kept her a secret, and the Baron kept her a secret, and not very many other people knew that she just had residence in that tower. Silas, for example, even though he was the court wizard, didn't know about her. He suspected, and then after everybody was dead and he didn't really have anything to do, he goes, okay, I'm going to find out what the secret was in the Castle Wailmoor, and went to Castle Wailmoor, and well, presently got eaten by a bunch of demons. And that was like the impetus, the last thing that occurred before the castle faded completely into the ethereal plane. Essentially, it just trapped him there, and he wasn't really able to escape. And then, if you're just trapped in a castle with a bunch of demons, well, the demons are going to kill you. And that's what happened to poor Silas. And so that's kind of the tour of the map. Our apologies for having this drag on. I feel a little bit like Chris Roberts with Star Citizen planning to do a cool thing and then given a lot more money than expected. Curse of the Lost Memories might well clock in at 200 pages. We want to ship the books before Christmas or die trying. Exactly when, it's hard to say. We're very nearly text complete. There's the cleanup of the typos, the continuity review, the proofreading, more 5e playtesting, and any necessary feedback revisions, and that's about it. This module covers levels 1 to 4, or 5 levels if you count the XP at the very end. So a mega module for just 5 levels, and as a backer you might be thinking, are we crazy? And we've actually thought about that ourselves. Are we crazy? And we go in and cut things and rearrange things, and the page count doesn't really decrease for what we want to do. So we've made cuts, but we haven't made any cuts based on arbitrary page count rules. All a big page count means in the grand scheme of things is increased shipping and printing costs and increased logistics, both of which we can regain by selling the books post-backer shipment for a standard retail price for a hardcover book. So we're in this all the way. Curse of the Lost Memories is everything we've always wanted as DMs, and our only regrets right now is that we won't be able to play in the module. Well, the only regret besides this not actually shipping in June when we wanted it to. What does the future look like? We're just not going to do the Kickstarter for Beneath the Drury Wave, which is the second book, until the text is 100% complete. Most likely we'll seriously consider bringing on a third lead writer or designer. Christoph and I are doing the work of 4 people, and it's just the 2 of us here at Griffon Lore Games. And that's just something that can't carry on in the future. We have a really specific vision for this adventure path, and so it's just going to need at least 1 additional person. We also might blast out the map pack ASAP. Initially we were going to encapsulate the PDFs with a fancy layout. Now we're considering simply bundling the really large files raw and let everyone have at it, in addition to sending the printers their files that they need to actually go ahead and ship it to the physical map tier backers. And we haven't forgotten about the guide to the Kingdom of Lothmar. That's going to kick some major ass, but we need to focus on the module and the maps first, and then move along with this. And it should be a premier campaign guide of all campaign guides, and we're going to send that out in 3 versions. You're going to get the bare bones PDF, then you're going to get the formatted PDF, and then the fancy print version to the appropriate print tiers. And before I go, we're going to switch to a format where we're going to be releasing videos about every week, hopefully on Monday. And the next video, we're going to be showing what your book is actually going to look like, both the PDF and the print book. So thanks, guys. I really appreciate everyone's patience. I really appreciate it if you watch this video. I really appreciate all the comments you are leaving. And in the update, we have the contact info. So if you want to email us or give us a ring or chat to us on Discord, please feel free to do so. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you later.